Folks, welcome to another episode of Prophetic Perspective on location here at the Prophecy Watchers Conference in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I have Mondo Gonzales of Prophecy Watchers. He's the host of this conference, and you know, you go to a conference, getting the host for 5 minutes is a real challenge. A beautiful jacket, by the way, brother.
My new jacket on.
Yeah, Billy Crone's kind of a
I'm
little
not all the way to
influence
Billy,
on
but I'm going to the middle ground. That's good.
Well, folks, we know in the end times the Bible prophesies that there'll be a great apostasy. Many reflect that to the church. Some interpret it as maybe it means the rapture. But Mondo, you have quite an interesting view of the apostasy in end times. Maybe you could share that with our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that I do believe that the church is going to depart from the faith in many ways. Paul says that in 1 Timothy 4:1. So I clearly believe we're living in the age of Laodicea.
Well, we see it all around.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's obvious.
It's undeniable.
Yeah.
The question comes in 2 Thessalonians 2 when Paul says the day of the Lord cannot be present unless the apostasy comes first and the man of sin is revealed. And he goes on talking about the man of sin sitting in the temple and other things. And so the question has always been, is the apostasy there in reference to the church? And I would say in our dispensational camp, really of the last 100 years, that's the church. And so the day of the Lord cannot come. The typical interpretation is the day of the Lord cannot come. But prior to the day of the Lord starting, or the tribulation period, there would be a great apostasy of the church.
2 Thessalonians 2. Right?
Yes. And so again, we know 1 Timothy 4 that in the last days, many will depart from the faith. So that is true. But I think that there's the phrase, you have right theology from the wrong passage. So we have the right theology that there is going to be this departing of the faith, 1 Timothy 4. But does the apostasy in 2 Thessalonians 2 refer to the church? And so interestingly, I've been thinking about this for a long time, at least a few years, and there's a couple angles to it. And the nugget on it is kind of fun, is that Andy Woods, as you mentioned, the word apostasy has been interpreted as being a departure like the rapture.
Yeah, Tommy Ice particularly.
Tommy Ice, Andy Woods, and so that they have had this viewpoint that the day of the Lord can't happen until the rapture happens first. Well, again, that's right theology. I think that's right theology.
But I'm not quite sure the context is there.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah, so I agree. It's right theology, wrong passage. I don't think it says especially because some of the work that has been done in the arguments by Andy Woods and others, who we respect, we love him, brother.
Absolutely.
But when Lee Brainerd wrote his book Apostasia, he demolished that. I think it is. I encourage the audience, if you're in that, he 283 times he looked at the Greek word apostasia in all the literature from the Septuagint 275 BC all the way to 680. 283 times, not a single time did it ever mean physical departure. Okay, so I'm not even really going to get into that because I think Lee has done that. But the thing that Andy said, which his argument against the view that it's the church, because he doesn't believe it's an apostasy of the church either.
Yeah. Oh,
he believes it's the rapture.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So one of his arguments is, hey, there's a definite article there on the apostasy. So how do you know the apostasy has happened? There's no definitive, we don't have a pope, right?
Well, like what's the level? Because obviously we see, I was driving through Bozeman, Montana last year, and every church had a gay pride flag on it. I mean, we see the apostasy in the church, but are we talking about a general apostasy across the church? Or are we talking about a huge event where every Christian is just like, forget it, I've given up on God? Or is this related to the Jewish people?
Yes. So that what his argument is that because of the Greek definite article there, it is clearly a single event, just like the revealing because of the Antichrist, because it says the apostasy comes first and the revealing of the Antichrist, singular event. So he says, the church has been departing the faith from the 1850s. You think about Harvard, how it used to be dedicated to the gospel, and look, the 1600s. And so the seminaries from the 1850s on, there has been this mass departation from the faith. So it was not a definitive event, which 2 Thessalonians speaks about a definitive event. So he's like, so for him though, he would say, this proves to me that this is not the church. This is the rapture. And I say, okay, I agree with you, but what you didn't consider was this singular definitive event of apostasy referring to the Jews. So he hasn't considered that because his only option was the rapture.
Well, since he's addressing the church in Thessalonica, wouldn't that be a Greek audience, not a Jewish audience?
Well, that's a great question. So the way I'm going to discuss that is, we know that the day of the Lord, right? Because 2 Corinthians 2:1 are coming together, which we all believe is the rapture. And then he says that as if the day of the Lord has come. Let no one deceive you in any way. So the day of the Lord that he's describing is, none of us believe the church is involved in that, right?
That's true.
So the entire context is he's talking about things that are happening inside the day of the Lord. Well, that's why I say, well, is the church inside the day of the Lord? No. Because what Paul says there, he doesn't say, and this is where I'm shocked at so many of the interpretations, because people will say, hey, Paul says it can't come until the apostasy comes first. So what they interpret that is the apostasy has to happen before the day of the Lord. The word before is not in there.
Okay.
It is not, and you see at least, or precede, it has to precede. It's not in there. What he's saying there, and I'll show this, and it's crystal clear in Paul's writing. He's saying, hey, hey guys, we're not in the tribulation. We're not in the day of the Lord. Because the first thing that happens inside the day of the Lord isn't the apostasy. That is the first event inside the day of the Lord.
A great turning away from God into the Antichrist.
Yes.
And the Jewish people will accept him as a messianic figure.
There's my punchline right there.
Oh, I didn't mean to take it, but
No.
you made it seem so obvious.
Yes. So see, if we say that, and so it comes down to this: if we interpret it as whatever the apostasy happens before, I would agree. That's not what he's saying, though. And if you look at it, the Greek is crystal clear. This happens inside. So if that's the case, if we present it in that way, if we first understand the grammar, then say, how many believe the church is going to be inside the day of the Lord? Well, nobody. How can they apostatize?
Rain. Wow.
But
because I always took the interpretation as it happens before. But you're right, the before isn't there. We just kind of assume that it's inferred.
We assume that it's inferred. And in some language, you could say, hey, I'm not saying in English that we would say, before this, I already committed myself. Before the day of the Lord, this has to happen first. If it said that, I would say yes.
Yeah.
But he doesn't say that. He doesn't say before the day, never. He just says, hey, it cannot be here unless that thing happens first. So the first event is that. And so when we think about what you just said, what's the context? That day of the Lord is all Jewish. It's a time of Jacob's trouble. He immediately talks about an apostasy, which again we're going to discuss, and then he talks about the man of sin, and then he goes on, what's he doing? He's sitting in the temple of God, which is where? In Jerusalem. It's a whole Jewish context the whole rest of the way. So even though he's writing to the Thessalonians, he's writing to them about the day of the Lord, which is a Jewish day of the Lord, and saying, you guys have nothing to worry about. You are not involved in this. And I already told you, you guys are freaking out for no reason, because he actually uses the phraseology that they're scared out of their mind.
Yeah.
Because you guys are
terrified.
They were terrified. And he says, you guys have nothing to be terrified about. It's a great preacher rapture verse as well, by saying, you have nothing to be scared of, because if you know that the first thing that happens is the apostasy of the Jews, and we're not going to be here. So
because so many people mess up 2 Thessalonians 2 and think it's actually a teaching about the mid-trib rapture.
Exactly.
And they get that. But you blow my mind. Well, Mondo, how can folks find out more? Where can they get your full teaching on this?
So we're going to be, I'm going to be presenting this here, and so at Prophets Watchers at this conference, and then so prophetwatchers.com. This will be something that I've written an article on. You can find it on our website under articles, but I'm going to develop a little bit better in as a presentation for tomorrow, and the encouragement that it gives. So it's not just all these academics, it's like, no, this is going to be so awesome that...
Well, it's got to be clear, because it was meant to give the Thessalonian church hope, and it's meant to give us hope as well. Well, thank you so much, Mondo. I appreciate you just kind of blew my mind, because I've been studying this for years and never took it that it might be referring to the Jews as well.
One last thing. I'm not the only one that has said this. I found several commentaries from the 1800s that this is like, well, this is clearly what it is. This is a Jewish apostasy. So I'm like, I'm not original. I mean, I was thinking about it, but going out and studying, like, they saw that too in the context. Okay. So I'm not alone.
Well, folks, you can have hope. We're not living in the tribulation right now, but you will live in the tribulation if you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior. Surrender your lives to Jesus Christ today. Make Him the Lord and Savior of your life. God bless.